We can get started. Well, hello, everyone, and good evening to you, those who are joining us from Europe, Istanbul, elsewhere. I first of all, thank you all for attending this talk. I know everybody is distracted and everybody is, thinking about lots of other things. So thanks a lot, and we'll take a little break from the world, and hopefully we'll concentrate on something a lot more pleasant. Although I don't know if but anyhow, our speaker will tell you what is pleasant and what is not pleasant about this topic. So let me first introduce our commentator, and as we like to say nowadays, first questions asker, Bilge Yabanci. Bilge is one of our own. We share her with Foscari University in Venice, Italy. She's a Marie Curie postdoctoral fellow here at Northwestern, but I think, yes, currently she's in Ankara doing part of her research. And this current research is she's investigating how the immigrant and refugee rights movement, IRRM in Turkey, can tailor its public communication strategies to reframe migrants and refugees as deserving and rights-bearing agents. She's also finalizing a book manuscript here. It's titled Civil Society and Autocratization, Repression, Co-optation, and Contestation in Turkey. And before Northwestern, she was the recipient of an Open Society Fellowship and the Swedish Institute Postdoctoral Fellowship, both very prestigious awards. Our speaker today, and before I introduce her, let me remind you, as usual, we have the books. Just, shoot Alison an email, come by and pick up your book. We have them here at the Buffett office. So Elise, I think to this group doesn't need any introduction. She's also almost one of our own. She's an honorary member because she has helped us. She has shared her expertise with us so many times, so generously. I think the first time she was here, it was 2019, so before COVID days. And so we are very happy, particularly happy to host her again, if over Zoom, to talk about her most recent book, which is here. Elise Massicard is a senior researcher at CNRS, one of those wonderful French acronyms, the French National Center for Scientific Research. This is she's based in SciencesPo in Paris, and that's also where she got her PhD in 2002. She is a political sociologist with a focus on contemporary Turkey. And I should note she is a scholarly dynamo, so I will not be able to cite all her accolades and her accomplishments and her publications here, but let me mention just a few highlights. Her first monograph was titled The Alevis in Turkey and Europe, Identity and Managing Territorial Diversity, and this was published in 2012 by Routledge. And she is also the co-editor of 3 volumes, Negotiating Political Power in Turkey, Breaking Up the Party. This was published in 2013. Order and Compromise, Government Practices in Turkey from the Late Ottoman Empire to the Early 21st Century, 2015. And Contemporary Populists in Power, a topic that we can all learn more about. This was published in 2022. And one element that is common to all these works and her writings is that Elise's work, it seamlessly combines ethnography and theory, which is, rarely the case. If one is strong, the other is usually. But so that is a very exceptional quality of her scholarship. And also, I have to say, she was quite prescient about, her foresight in choosing muhtars, the, leaders, village leaders, as a topic of study, even though her colleagues were wondering, why would you do that? And then, of course, we understood the importance of muhtars. So without taking any more of your time, I'm going to leave the floor to Elise Massicard, and you can send your questions in the chat, but after the talk and Bilge's comments, we'll also let you ask questions if you prefer, turning on your microphone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, İpek, for the invitation, also the opportunity to present this book here, and I'm so happy to be back with you, even if it is only from afar. It's still a pleasure and a great honor, so thank you so much. Can I share my screen? Probably, yes. So, yes. So yeah, thank you very much again, and hello everybody. So let me present this last book. Actually, the starting point of that research was actually my kind of dissatisfaction with a widespread idea, a very common idea, that the Turkish state is a strong state. The Turkish state is widely considered as a kind of unified entity, and that is clearly differentiated from society, that is largely impermeable to social demands, and that is able to impose its order on society. And this view is still very widespread in political science, where I come from. Actually, this idea has been criticized and qualified, but mostly by historians and anthropologists, and not so much in political science. So actually, I was very interested and inspired by that literature of anthropology of the state, and also state and society relations. But these literatures mostly look at contentious settings, like groups, contentious groups, or contentious settings where the state is contested or state authority is contested. And I wanted to focus actually on the everyday, on where state and society are in contact on an everyday basis, and in not especially so contentious contexts, or settings that can be contentious or can be not contentious. So that's why actually at the beginning I chose to look at muhtars, who are, as you know, probably the lowest level officials in Turkey, at the neighborhood level or at the village level. And that was the book that İpek just showed. And so muhtars are widely considered insignificant, as you know, irrelevant, because they have no power, and they have no decisional power, and they have no budget, etc. And there are many things that they don't have. So, but actually, for me, they were still quite important, at least not peripheral, because this is often, not only, but often through them that some citizens experience the state on an everyday basis for mundane paperwork, or to get some social assistance, or many other issues, actually. So actually, my bet was that the analysis of everyday interactions between these local level officials and neighborhood dwellers would provide some kind of insights into the everyday enactment of the state and state-society relations. So I chose to kind of approach concrete encounters between forms of public authority and the more or less mundane practices of ordinary people. So my question actually from the beginning shifted from seeking to ascertain if the Turkish state was strong or weak, to kind of understanding how the Turkish state is produced on the ground and experienced on an everyday level through what is played out around these everyday encounters. So what made muhtars actually interesting to me is that they are not typical officials. Instead, there are, I think they are kind of institutional hybrids. As you may know, their position is characterized by a kind of fundamental ambiguity. They are somewhere in between state officials on the one side and elected representatives on the other side. Actually, they show many similarities with street-level bureaucrats. But the main difference is that they are not really bureaucrats, actually, because they are elected by the residents. And that wholly alters the way they relate to the people they administrate, because the same people are their constituents. Of course, this has many consequences. So then we could say, okay, muhtars are like local representatives, like municipal councillors, for example, but again, they are quite different from other elected people, especially from local politicians, because they are not linked, not anymore actually, since 1980, they are not linked to political parties. So they are elected, but on other basis, partly on other basis, not only, sometimes also, but not really on party political basis. So they enjoy other forms of loyalty. And their local legitimacy actually also stems precisely from the fairly ambiguous links that they have with the official authorities. So there are some kind of in-between, and that's why I describe them as institutionalized intermediaries between people and the state. And I think it is, even if muhtars are not bureaucrats, it is interesting to contrast them with bureaucrats, whom, as you probably remember, Weber defines bureaucrats by their distance from the people they administer. On the contrary, I argue that the role of muhtars is defined precisely by their proximity with the residents and their embeddedness in the neighborhood. So for me, this proximity is manifold. It is both geographical, social, and relational. So because muhtars are geographically and socially closer to the people than any other official or local representative in Turkey. For example, here you see, this is really, well, what is written on that muhtarlık door shows the very low education level. And this is not an exception. So actually their education level is quite low. So there is this kind of social proximity to the ordinary people. And also another dimension of this proximity is that muhtars live in the neighborhood. And that's not a detail, because they are engaged in neighborhood relationships, mundane relationships. Often they also keep other professional activities. And this is also important. So here you have Emlak ve İnşaat office, and at the same time it's also muhtar. So, and this is not an exception again, and this is important because that shows that muhtars, like, they keep other economical interests outside their position as muhtar, so, and including with the residents of the neighborhood. So they have other kinds of links to the people around. So muhtars officiate in a context of relative interconnectedness, where people actually know each other. I don't mean here that everybody knows everybody, but I mean here that there is a possibility for the muhtar, also for some other people, but that the possibility to obtain information about anybody through a limited number of intermediaries. So why do I stress that dimension? Why is that so important to me? Because one of the key responsibilities of the muhtars is to provide certificates, especially resident certificates and poverty certificates. And these poverty certificates and also resident certificates, they are very, very long tradition, I think. It's a very, it's set since like, like probably at least the 19th century, probably before. So by doing so, muhtars prove the status of individuals for state institutions. So they play a key role in the official certification of people by the state. and for the state. That's why now the Turkish version of the book is coming out, and we have chosen this, like picture with the stamp, the mühür, which is a symbol of that certification power. And so the Muhtar's testimony provides the basis for the production of officialdom, official papers and rights. So to do so, to vouch for the situation of the people, they are supposed to know or to be able to learn about the social and economical situation of the residents and to vouch for it. So that's interesting, because even if people sometimes have rights or possibilities, opportunities established by law or by private people sometimes, individuals cannot always access them without a certification by the Muhtar. So here you have, like, it's written that if you want to have a Ramadan basket, you have to get this certificate, poverty certificate from the Muhtar. So he opens the possibility to get that. So the main skill of the Muhtars is their ability to mobilize social interconnectedness to vouch for the situation of people. And the knowledge that Muhtars use to do that, it's not a database, it's not written knowledge, it's not universal knowledge, it's not impersonal knowledge, it's personalized and experiential knowledge. So Muhtars work at the very intersection of society and the state. And it's important to recall that their mediating function works both ways round and not only top-down. Since they are subject to state injunctions, for example, they are asked to help, for example, the police locating suspects, etc. But at the same time, they are dependent upon their constituents. So Muhtars are caught up in complex and sometimes contradictory loyalties. So my initial research question was whether or not Muhtars are part of the state, if they act as state agents, or on the contrary, if they act as relays for the interests of the inhabitants. But at some point, I changed my perspective, and the book actually aims to go beyond any like straightforward top-down or bottom-up interpretation. Instead, it argues that Muhtars embody a form of indirect government, because the state actually hands over to Muhtars whole swathes of activity in identifying individuals, keeping track of their activities, implementing public policies. So it means that the Turkish state actually hands over these activities to people whom it has not selected, whom it has not trained, and over whom it exerts very little control. So that's not the way we're used to think about the Turkish state. And one of the key characteristics, I think, of these officials is that the state exerts a very incomplete authority over them. In other words, the state makes no claim to the Muhtar's allegiance or exclusive allegiance, but instead, the state wants them to be embedded in local society. So the challenge that its book addresses is to move beyond viewing this as some kind of shortcoming, or beyond viewing this as a kind of remain from the past that is deemed to disappear like tomorrow. But instead, try to analyze what that produces, the resultant effects in terms of government. So the research actually is based on a long empirical study of the way in which Muhtars actually carry out their role on a daily basis. So I carried out firsthand in-depth grounded fieldwork with regular monitoring of Muhtars' activities, with interviews and many observations of their interactions with residents during 2 years. And I did that only in Istanbul because I was living there and I needed to be there, actually. I did not have the chance to do the same kind of work like in a village, or I would have loved to do that, for example, in some Kurdish area, but I did not have the chance. So I think it would be like fascinating to do that. But I thought also that in Istanbul, you have sufficiently various situations. So I tried to select a sample of 6 neighborhoods for their diversity in terms of their geography, with both central neighborhoods and outlying ones, in terms of their socioeconomic characteristics, with wealthy neighborhoods and more like modest places and economically very insecure areas, and in terms of like how long they have existed, with both old settled neighborhoods and also new ones resulting from recent migrations, and also with neighborhoods with different political leanings, which proved to be very important. So I have quite a diverse sample, but of course it's not like complete, but still, well. So I don't have the time to go into the detail of the findings, but my very broad conclusion is that this form of what I call street level governing produces very contrasting political effects. On the one hand, muhtars facilitate the relationships of citizens to the state to some extent. But on the other hand, they create also an image of a negotiable state that is not neutral. So let me come to the first dimension. That in many ways, muhtars do facilitate the citizens' relationship to the state. They provide a kind of face-to-face and often personalized point of contact between citizens and the state. And they embody actually the exact contrary of cold, inhuman, and impersonal bureaucracy. I don't know if you know the Herzl's book on bureaucratic indifference. That's the contrary. The social embeddedness generates accessibility and forms of familiarity. Some people would actually tend to go much more easily to the muhtars than to another or classical bureaucratic institution, administration maybe. So I say some people because that's not the case of all people, especially it's not the case of well-off people or like educated people would tend not to go to the muhtar if they don't have to. But the people who would prefer to go to the muhtar in general would be more people who are not really at ease with officialdom, with bureaucracy, with scripture, or with legality. And I would tend to think that is quite a number of people in Turkey. So because the muhtar is somebody you can more easily maybe ask for advice or preach one's cause or ask for some kind of personalized help. And by employing circuits of familiarity, muhtars actually do make the state more accessible and amicable to those citizens or some of those citizens. Because of their social embeddedness, muhtars do not act only according to some raison d'etat. Here I draw on the sociology of organizations and especially on Lipski's seminal work that has shown that low-level or street-level bureaucrats, as he called them, never just implement the rules. They play with the rules, they apply them according to their own interests. And this is also the case, and maybe even more so the case for muhtars because of their proximity to the population. Probably because of this, residents actually come to muhtars with many requests that extend far beyond the official responsibilities of muhtars. Well, they come for help for paperwork, for assistance in dealing with the authorities, collective services to the neighborhoods, but also for individual requests like finding their way, finding a job, finding a tenant, finding a babysitter, and many other secrets. So interestingly, so how do muhtars react to those requests? And they don't reject those requests, actually, interestingly. They do actually experience tensions between their official role and the expectations and insistent requests of the residents. And mostly muhtars try to combine these diverging role descriptions. And sometimes they have to make hard choices, and the book is full of such situations, which I found fascinating. But what is important to me here is that muhtars generally, even if they can't help, even if they don't help, generally they perform as helpful to the people, in part because they depend on them for re-election. So here it's during the campaign, the election campaign. So of course, it's like promise if you get into a trouble, call muhtar Selatin, tin tin tin muhtar Selatin, and there's also a song. You know, it's not just written. There's also but that's a campaign. But that's more than that. I mean, there's some truth in that. Muhtars actually do, to some extent, they do that. So they would bring, for example, some certificates home to somebody who needs it, or they would answer their phone calls on Sundays or at night, etc. And even if they can't help, which is very often the case because they have no means and they have no power, but they would perform as helpful. And by doing so, that's important because they produce the image of a state that is, accessible and here for you. So human and amicable. And this brings me to the other dimension of the political effects of that kind of street level government. So, because on the other hand, this familiarity results in the state being shorn of its claim for neutrality. In other words, this familiarity also opens the way to bypassing the official rules, and that's its main interest. Let's put it here. Like, because Muhtars perform as being on the side of the residents, trying to find their way in a bureaucracy that is not always understandable, to say the least, and a state that is widely considered unfair. Because they do that and perform as willing to help, they do that even if that entails infringing some official rules. For example, Muhtars, and I observed that so many times, they would often turn a blind eye to a small error or to a missing document in some file, or they would provide people with a certificate, even if they are not really entitled to, or they would provide some information that they are not supposed to provide. Why do they do that? Because it is in their interests, in their personal interest, to provide small favors to the residents, because that reinforces their personal credit. And by performing as willing to infringe the rules for the sake of residents' interests, Muhtars produce the image of a state with which individuals can't negotiate or try to negotiate at least, and a state that offers ways of bypassing its own rules. Therefore, they do favors, and favors are a very important dimension of the Muhtars' work. They are not an exception, but they are a common pattern of behavior of the Muhtars. In the book, I analyzed, this fee. If you go to the Muhtars, you need a certificate, you have to pay the fee, and it's written, it's red, it's bold, it's on the wall, but it's not paid. As actually, mostly it's not paid, or it's paid but reduced, or it's negotiated all the time. And these fees actually go directly to the Muhtars' pocket. So it's important. It's like giving something. So very importantly, favors are this common expectation of the people. But favors are, as I said, not exceptional, but they are also not systematical, because a systematical favor is not a favor. So why do Muhtars provide favors to some people but not others? It depends on the relationship to the people. It depends actually on lots of things. But the opinion is widespread that Muhtars do dispense favors, but not to everybody, to some groups and not to others, especially on family grounds, political grounds, religious, regional, ethnic, whatever grounds. And this idea, which is so widespread, in turn fuels feelings of exclusion and distance from the state among some people that are not part of these privileged groups. And more importantly, this fuels the image of a state that is not neutral and that may be accessible and helpful, but not to all citizens equally, and also not only on party political basis. But in turn, that shorns the state from its claim of neutrality. By way of a conclusion, I would like to leave you with the following thoughts. First, that institution, the Muhtarlık, reveals everyday forms of interaction between citizens and the state that are frequently hidden from view. This institution is characterized by the incomplete hold that the state has over it and by the importance that it leaves to social dynamics that are very different from the state order. And through this kind of concession, I argue, emerges a specific mode of government. The street-level government coexists with and takes place within a broadly, mostly bureaucratized environment with databases, etc. And this coexistence provides for very interesting research questions, I think. Secondly, this work speaks to approaches in terms of, law politics in Bayat's words or infra-politics in Scott's words or vernacular politics in White's words. And these forms of politics have mostly in the literature been analyzed as anti-hegemonic. And I consider in that book vernacular politics, if we take that wording, not as separated from or opposed to legal or official politics, but in relationship with it. And in that perspective, this shows that everyday politics, or vernacular politics, as you may call it, may also have hegemonic effects, like facilitating the relationship between citizens and the state. And actually, as you may know, after he was elected president in 2014, I actually ended my fieldwork just before he was elected president. Erdogan has called hundreds of muhtars every month to his palace and delivered speeches about general policy, and everybody was surprised. And IPEC said that everybody, when I began my research, was like wondering why I was interested in so irrelevant people like muhtars. And after Erdogan began that process of inviting and making visible muhtars and making them like important, valuable, it legitimized my research. I was so happy. But beyond that, I think it is interesting because what actually Erdogan tried to do is to control more the muhtars, make them more tied to state rationales. And that is a very interesting endeavor. And I think that it has shown also clear limits, but I would be very happy to speak about that with you. Thank you for your attention. I will stop here.
Bilge, do you want to take on?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Elise, for this amazing presentation and for being with us today to talk about your book. And thank you so much, IPEC, for inviting me to comment on this fascinating work of Elise. It's a great pleasure. So the book really presents a fascinating account of this unique institution built on, as you said, popular legitimacy, state bureaucracy, and the informality of everyday relations. And you have given already many details, and I'll try to highlight some of the others I picked from the book. And I think, first of all, the book's methodology just does justice to this hybrid institution, which cannot be captured with anything but with an interdisciplinary lens, really. And I found the book full of anthropological insights, and yet informed by political science and sociology at its core. And there are many strengths there, but one of the main strengths is that really it takes the concept of the state and reverses it upside down by showing us the limits of this abstraction of the state as an ever-present juridico-political entity, as mostly assumed or treated by political science discipline, not only in Turkey, but in general, all around. So the book really deconstructs the state and the need separation between the state and society, between informality and formality, and between domination and resistance. And it encourages us social scientists of different backgrounds, but especially political scientists, to look into everyday representations of the state to understand how people interact with the state or make sense of the state. And the book does this in several ways. And there are so many points I have noted down. My copy is really highlighted all around, but I would like to mention a few that pop up all around the book to draw particular attention, especially maybe coming from a political science perspective. So the first crucial lesson from the book is that although it is a very old institution that dates back to Tanzimat, as you thoroughly discuss in the first chapter, muhtarlık is not strictly structured. For instance, becoming a muhtar does not require any kind of formal education or partisan affiliation. And it is very odd from a political scientist point of view, although a muhtar needs to be elected by popular vote, they are not like party politicians who mainly socialize through the party rank and file and rise from low level. And their allegiance is not expected towards a party. And you discuss through your sample that sometimes a realtor gets elected, at times an activist, and sometimes it's a kind of a family business that children or close relatives want to continue the family tradition. And of course, this means that different backgrounds of muhtars not coming from any party rank, shape to a great extent how they handle this position. And this opens up many possibilities different from other elected figures like mayors and MPs. And you already mentioned that they can carve themselves spaces by utilizing discretion and informality when it comes to, for example, distributing aid to the urban poor by determining who is entitled, who is not. And despite the increasing digitization of bureaucracy, muhtars are still one of the critical interlocutors for both the recipients of aid and also dispensers of it, like the private ones, because they maintain their daily relations with their voters as shopkeepers, customers, neighbors, or friends, which is again very unique. And I'm not sure if there are any similar institutions in other countries. And you mentioned that local anchoring is key to the muhtar's role, but then we also see in the book, this is pretty much the only common denominator, which brings me to another point from the book I would like to highlight. Although all of them are embedded in their districts as long-term residents, not all muhtars you discuss in the book engage themselves personally to the same extent. There are so many factors that generate this difference. We see how their partisan affiliations sometimes and the ensuing relations with municipalities controlled by different parties become a crucial factor in the end, in some cases, affecting how they engage with the problems of their districts and requests from people, from the grassroots, from the bottom up. And when I was reading the book, I was really wondering when the current politics that is dominated by top-down partisan interventionist and even autocratic tendencies will come into the picture. And if you're like me, you need to wait towards the end when there is this entire chapter on the declining autonomy of muhtars, given the direct co-optation attempts by the AKP. And like almost all institutions, the AKP has sought to incorporate muhtarlık within its ruling coalition by seeking to please muhtars, and also at the same time creating a sort of consentful obligation to turn their allegiance to the government. And to a certain extent, the AKP has managed to do so, but not in all cases, not all muhtars have surrendered their autonomy. Then one really wonders, what is so significant about the position that it endures today, and what does its survival tell us about the state-society relations today? Of course, the book provides several answers throughout the chapters, but how can we summarize its endurance in a nutshell, I was asking myself. And I think the notion of governmentality might be handy here. You mentioned Foucault in the introduction, of course, but the book maybe does not take governmentality as a central theme. And governmentality, of course, encompasses not only formal institutions and structures, but also various techniques, strategies, and forms of knowledge for societies to manage themselves, especially as the state becomes less and less visible in the age of neoliberalism. And it is particularly relevant to consider, in my opinion, given that muhtar's autonomy and peculiar position can be interpreted within the framework of this shift from explicit rules and regulations and centralized authority to delegation and outsourcing of some of the tasks of the state to non-state or private actors. And in my opinion, muhtar's various roles described in the book fit in this scheme very well. Let's take, for example, the distribution of aid via private means like NGOs and charitable foundations. And governments and political authorities prefer delegation of social aid by transferring these functions. And for the government, muhtars are trustable intermediaries, so the state can, to a large extent, withdraw from provision for poor. And muhtars are also trusted by private providers as competent actors, backed by official authority to determine the needed. So muhtars preserve this pivotal role to make decisions and make this delegation of responsibility possible. And another dimension in which we can approach the endurance of muhtars through the perspective of governmentality in the age of neoliberalism is the idea of flexibility, the adaptation, the favors you mentioned, the multiple options to choose among. For instance, the book mentions that the muhtarlıks provide options so citizens can decide to get services like residence certificates or election cards via the digital system, as well as by approaching muhtars, which gives room for flexibility. So the fact that their autonomy also has come under some constraints through partisan interventions lately also tells how governmentality perspective operates through subtle forms of surveillance, a normalization of disciplining power that the government seeks to assert through muhtars at the local level. So overall, the book provides much food for thought, backed by plenty of original empirical insights from first-hand participation. And what I kept wondering after finishing the book, and maybe you can elaborate a bit more here, is first, how muhtars intervene and take part in conflict resolution at the district level between residents. By conflict resolution, I mean disputes of legal concern between families, between neighbors, tenants and landlords, or even between married couples. Did you come across any role that muhtars undertake and seek conflict resolution in this sense and prevent such matters of legal concern from being reported to the police or courts? That would be quite interesting from the perspective you take in the book. I mean, the power of the state being fragile and not actually omnipresent. Second, I wonder how muhtars reinterpret and position themselves in refugee-intensive neighborhoods. Clearly, in some cities, certain districts, and they are not well-off districts, we know, they have been dominated by refugees and migrants in recent years. And of course, muhtars position themselves, on the side of the people. They position themselves on the side of the people in their districts because those people elect them. But in these particular districts, muhtars' existence is based on a democratic deficit because clearly, after all, non-citizens cannot vote. The minority could vote for them. Citizens who vote in these working class, poor communities also tend to carry anti-refugee attitudes as they see themselves as the victims of this, low-paid, low-skilled jobs that refugees, quote unquote, steal from them. So muhtars find themselves probably between a rock and a hard place, keeping order, resolving conflicts, and responding to everyone's needs. And I wonder if you have encountered this new reality already back in 2013, and how muhtars reinterpret their roles and functions in these refugee-intensive poor districts. I think I will stop here, and thank you very much once again.
Elise, do you want to go ahead and respond to this, and then we'll start taking questions from the audience?
Sure. Thank you very much, Bilge, for those fascinating comments and your very nice insights. I think it's very stimulating. Thank you also for your laudatory comments. I think you really mentioned some really key points. I want to try to answer your questions, but there are big questions, and react to some points you have raised. I think your question about what is so significant that it survives. I think this is a really crucial question. If we keep in mind that I think this institution is the oldest institution that is still in place in today's Turkey. I can think of no other Ottoman institution that still exists today. So it is really a puzzle. And I think that it survives. We can take it from different sides, this question, but I think it survives because it is invested by people. So that many people want it to exist. And when I say many people, I mean what you also raised. I mean both residents on the ground and also some rulers, because it may be useful in different ways for several things. So basically, I think that it is very interesting. I kept wondering because before the e-devlet, the databases and numerization of many public services, for example, to get some official papers, you needed to go to the muhtar. You had no choice. But today, most of the things, not all, but most of the procedure you can also do at the population bureau or on the internet directly. And so, but actually what happens, and also the certificates that you can get on the internet, you can, if you get them from the internet, they are free. But if you go to the Muhtar, you have to pay for them. So, and then I wonder, why do people still go to the Muhtar and pay for it? So first, because they actually don't always pay. Okay, so let's keep that money issue aside. And also because I think here there is a question of really social representations of officialdom and of administration. I think this is really important, and representations of self-competences, actually, of the self for dealing with those issues. Many people just fear, you know, like they don't know how to do that, they are not secure, don't feel secure, etc., etc. And also because actually what is really fascinating, if you, I hang around in Muhtar's offices for days and days, and you know, everything is mixed up. You go to the Muhtar because you need a paper, but also at the same time you deal with some other thing, and you get some information on some other issue, etc. There is this multifunctional thing, you know, it's like an open office. So I think it is very useful for people when they don't really know, when they're not really sure, and when, you know, it's like some advice, and so that's the value for many people, that the value of Muhtars. And I think there is also a very big value of Muhtars for the rulers. And I think what I found really fascinating when Erdogan made this big meetings, there at one of these meetings was especially really very interesting, because it was just in 2015. It was before both general elections. So the AKP had lost its majority in the June election, and there was a rerun, etc. And it was just in the middle. It was like August or something. And then you remember, I think, this very tense period where there was very much violence, and that the conflict over the Kurdish issue was again very tense, etc. And at that point, it was very interesting. There was such a meeting, and Erdogan said at that very meeting, I want you, Muhtars, to go around and tell me what is happening in people's homes, and report if there are any terrorists, because Muhtars have to know. They know because they drink tea with the people, so they know if any terrorist is hanging around. And so when he did that, I think it is very telling, because it shows that what he wanted from the Muhtar was really something else than bureaucratic power, was really like being able to know what people are doing in their home and what they hide actually from the state, knowing what people hide from the state, knowing what is not registered. And so, and I think you are very right when you raise the issue of governmentality. This is another way of accessing the people, and for state institutions to read the people, to read their population. And I think this is the crucial point. And I think that this is not, I mean, this way of reading the population is not only existing through Muhtars. Actually, there are other devices and other institutions that also work to some extent like this, but it is most visible with Muhtars. And I think that this is a way of accessing the people that state institutions in Turkey rely on and need to some point, because, you know, because I think there is, I don't know how to express it very precisely, but there are clear limits to the bureaucratization and rationalization of state administration. There are clear limits everywhere in the world, but in Turkey, I think the limits are maybe clearer than elsewhere, and this is another way to grasp for the situation. And so I think what is fascinating at the beginning, I always like heard, well, Muhtar is going to disappear, etc. And then there was this fascinating reform of digitalization of everything. And so it was so interesting because the database, when I did my research, it had begun, it was not really achieved. And so there was this automatization of everything. And Muhtars were actually asked to go, for example, for the people registers, like you are register your address and it's automatical. There are the people's register and the electoral registers, etc., are generated automatically. But the governorships asked the Muhtars to go around and look with their eyes if people had really moved and if they really lived there. So I think, it is about testimony. It is about, as you said, trustable intermediaries. It is about like trusting people rather than machines. So it is really about governmentality and forms of knowledge. And I think I don't think I've gone far enough into this direction. I think this is a fascinating question. I would like really to, in other ways, maybe continue working on that. But I think what makes the value of Muhtars is that this trustable intermediary, as you say, is trustable both for the institutions and for the people, and also for private institutions. I mean, for example, it happens that people if you want a loan from a bank, that they ask the Muhtars if you have some debts, So it's really interesting that even private actors, and what we could see as very rational actors of economical rationality, etc., also, trust the Muhtars as an authority that you can really refer to. So I think this is really fascinating. And I really could observe that. I was at the beginning, I really couldn't believe what I was seeing. As you asked also why, if I could observe, if Muhtars take place in some legal resolution of conflicts, I do, of course, they do, and it's really interesting because they do intervene because people ask them to, mostly. In some very private matters. For example, what I heard the most was in divorce or separations of couples, where they would try to bring people together and families together, and preventing the conflicts to go into the judiciary, institution of the judiciary, and making some social mediation. And that's very interesting also, because actually their official positions give them this, intermediary position also in private matters. And it's not always worse, of course. Also because, the Muhtar is not anybody. He is somebody who is from that region, who is with that affiliation. So it's sometimes not always, it's not always easy to handle this position as a mediator, because both parts have to trust you, and that's not always the case. But I saw some instances where, yes, they tried to prevent they did manage to prevent some couples from separating or divorcing. And in doing so, it's interesting because in doing so, they do not, try to protect an official order. They try to protect a social order. And what is their social order, actually? What is this social order they try to protect? It's a very good question. And I think that because they are also quite uneducated people and they have no training whatsoever, they are just elected and they are one of the people around there. So it's kind of the mainstream representations of, the neighborhood. So it's quite a conservative institution. And that brings me to your other question about Syrians. So it was quite the beginning when I did my field work, and after, I went back and I did some follow-up work, but it was not, as in depth as I would like it to. But in those neighborhoods, what I could see from the first years, maybe it has changed since then, but in those district neighborhoods where there are many people from Syria, first they would act as informants, really, for the governors. I mean, in those situations, they are really asked to write very precise reports about how many people are there, what are they doing, and so they are, again, their everyday, their experiential knowledge of like seeing people on the streets all day is again mobilized by state institutions, and they would actually, it's not only spying on people, it's also as I said, they are quite a conservative institution. And when I say conservative, I mean also that the people there represent, if they do represent somebody, is the inhabitants, the locals. It means, for example, not the people who came recently. It means also not the tenants. You know, it's not the people that are just here like the students, whatever, people who are here, but, you know, they will go tomorrow. They are really protecting the interests of the settled people and the most influent groups in the neighborhood. So you have, which is excluding to some extent to the newcomers. And so that has also, and also that has consequences. And for example, but at the same time, they also have an attitude where they would try to prevent any kind of social problems. So they would really also, and I mean, that's how you say, coin with two sides. They would also, for example, identify, you know, people who are in real difficulty and try to help them or get them to, you know, find some solution. They would do that also for Syrian migrants to some extent, because they don't want trouble. They don't want trouble. And I mean, if there is trouble in their neighborhood, they are taken by the authorities as kind of responsible for this. So they are trying, you know, like to prevent. And so they would, you know, like know the people, speak with the people, indicate, etc., orientate people, and they would, like, I think, have some effect also in that direction. And so they would, some people would actually also try to get very much involved in assistance, social assistance for needy people, as much as they can do, which is not always much. But so yeah, I think again that's another way to deal with social issues again. But thank you very much for your insights, and I think this flexibility is probably key to its actually both endurance over time of the Muhtarlık institution and adaptation, both in history and also in several settings where what I could see is really very contrasted. I mean, for example, let me just mention that there has been this loss of autonomy in the last years of the Muhtarlıks, because, you know, like before even the concentration of power at the central level, etc., also the municipalities themselves have tried to get more involved at the neighborhood level, etc. So there have been a gradual loss of autonomy from different levels, etc. And so we could think that they have become kind of one like one arm of the state more than ever. But what I could see, for example, is that with the projects of urban transformation, which has raised tremendously, you know, the stakes of electing people at the neighborhood level, actually other kinds of people, new kinds of people have been elected muhtars, and in some neighborhoods, even like really activist left-wing people, some of them really, you know, with illegal backgrounds, like in illegal organizations, which you cannot really find in other elected positions in Turkey. So where, and there, the politicization of that position had very interesting consequences, where you could see also radicalization, but in the oppositional direction. So it's not, you know, it's not always easy to have a general overview because of all these contrasting situations. But still, I think, and this is maybe also key to the endurance of the institution, what I could see there back then is that in some places, and it was so fascinating, where, you know, you had already AKP at all levels, like back then also in the municipal metropolitan municipality, and in most municipalities in Istanbul and the state, etc. In some places, Muhtarlık was like the only place and the only official space where some people would like dare to go and dare to, you know, feel like I can go there and I can ask for something. Like oppositional people would go to the Muhtar because he would be the only one that was not AKP guy, you know, because so you had the micro spaces, sometimes very, as you said, disciplinary, sometimes very oppositional, but, you know, with their own kind of rationals. And so I think this, at the very space where state and society meet, is very challenging to think about, but I think it is very important even today. I will probably stop here. I could speak for hours, but.
Thanks. I'm going to let me remind everyone, if you want to ask a question in person, just raise your hand and then, you know, you can unmute yourself. But I'm going to first read a question in chat from Idil. Congratulations, Elise, great presentation. I have a question regarding how you analyze agency of people who engage with muhtarlık and potentially using it as a mechanism of political action. More specifically, I'm thinking about the post-earthquake times when people who organized around certain muhtarlıks and used it as a platform to act with solidarity and raise their voices. Thank you.
Thank you, Idil, for this question. Yes, I could not do any empirical research in the post-earthquake, but I think, I'm not surprised, because actually, because of this flexibility, muhtar do, you know, answer to requests from the people. So if people come with some like ideas about like earthquake and solidarity proposals, I'm not surprised that muhtars would actually react. And also because they have this, you know, how to say that, they have no money, they have no decisional power, but they know many people, they have many contacts, and they are in constant interaction with all kinds of issues. So there are really resources even for mobilizations. And so when the state was like not reacting during some days, I mean, when people want to, you know, like do something, this is somebody you can turn to, depending on the muhtar, of course, but like, because he would know how to, or if he doesn't or she doesn't, would know whom to ask for guidance. So, for example, I could see that muhtars were mobilized by some people for many kinds of issues that are not in their official powers. For example, there was in one of the neighborhoods I was following, there was this issue with the schooling zones that were being changed by the education directorate there, and so some people were not satisfied with the new school that their children were supposed to go to, and so muhtars have no competence about schools or anything like this, education, but those residents, they went there to the Muhtar, and they tried to mobilize the Muhtar, and they managed, and the Muhtar was sensitive because it was about, you know, like the residents' interests to have the children going to a nice school. So, and the Muhtar then, you know, like opposed the governorship. And so, and it was a one-shot thing to some extent, but I think this flexibility makes it possible to use it for several, you know, aims, directions, people, and that's why it's still alive, you know, because people use it in that way or this way. Sometimes it helps opening some doors. It's almost never sufficient to do something only with the Muhtar, because also they have some limits, of course. And especially it's complicated for them to oppose part of the population in their neighborhood. So when something is when you have big cleavages around an issue in a neighborhood, they would probably not, you know, get engaged and try to help. But in those kind of issue about assistance and post-earthquake, I'm not surprised that they would, you know, like centralize, organize, channel, etc. So, but I would love to hear more about that because I've not witnessed that. You are muted, Ipek. We can't hear you.
I'm still. Can you hear me now? Okay. You think after so many years I'd be used to this, but Faiza just sent a question, really interesting question. And this was actually something that I was thinking about too. Speaking of Muhtarlık as a conservative institution, I'm curious to know if you had a chance to work with any female Muhtars. If so, did you notice any gendered expectations of people from female Muhtars? Or did you notice a form of governmentality that was strategically gendered by the leadership of female Muhtars? Did they face any sexist discrimination from either the state or the people? Thank you. And can I add just one more thing to that? It's more of an anecdote, but I'm, you know, my family is from Anadolu Hisarı, which is pretty much, it's still a mahalle, you know, a typical mahalle. Everybody knows each other's business. You know, if your kid doesn't come out of the bus, they'll call you and say, you know, what's happening? Like, you know, almost one of those idealized nostalgic mahalles. I mean, it has lost that character recently. I won't go into the reasons, but our mahalle had a muhtar for, I don't want to give you a wrong figure, but it must have been at least 50 years. And she was a woman, Nazmiye Hanım. And right now there's a statue of her in our mahalle. And of course, our mahalle, also our cemetery is like 200 meters from the mahalle, and the you know, tomb there is almost like an anıt mezar, you know, this giant, you know, marble thing on top of it. And you know, she was always present, and connected with that, maybe I can, you know, add another question onto it. I was wondering if you can also talk about, if you had a chance to discuss the motivations of these people. I mean, why? It's a thankless job, you know, you would think, but apparently it's not. So anyway, I'll just stop there.
Thank you for your questions, and you have to make me a visit to Anadolu Hisarı. I want to see this mausoleum, almost this statue. So yes, well, I will begin with the question of Faiza. Thank you for your question. I did have the chance to work with two women muhtars. Actually, my sample was not very balanced, not very gender balanced, because women were overrepresented in my sample. I don't remember the exact figure, but I think they are like 4% of the muhtars or something like that. And I think, yes, people did have gendered expectations to them, as far as I could see. And also my two women Muhtars in my sample, they were in very different neighborhoods. So that was fascinating to observe. And so they do, actually, as far as I could see, basically, if you go to Muhtarlık, mostly women visit the Muhtars because they have more time, because Muhtarlıks often are open during working time, so working hours. So many, you can meet many women going there, but if the Muhtar is a woman herself, then even more women go there. I mean, it becomes a kind of, you know, yes, space where many women meet. And what's important is that it's beyond the boundaries of, you know, classical networks where they meet in their family or in some acquaintance network. So it's interesting because then you feel that there is another atmosphere, and that the expectation of the people, I would tend to think that gendered expectations of the people was that women Muhtars would be more involved in helping people in terms of assistance, etc. And it's very interesting. I had in my sample a very well-off neighborhood where the Muhtar was a woman, and she was not at all doing. She didn't like that assistance and social dimension, and she did not at all get involved into that. And it was really interesting to see that it's also possible not to behave like people would expect you to behave. So I didn't see any sexist discrimination, but there is still a big I think there is still a difference in terms of, you know, Muhtars are allowed to have guns, which actually may sound anecdotal or maybe more important in villages, but even in neighborhoods, the fact that they are allowed and mostly have their guns, I think does have consequences, and in terms of how people behave with them, etc. In terms of settling their authority and having people listen to them. And I think women Muhtars, the job of women Muhtars in that perspective is complicated because they also are allowed to have a gun, etc., but mostly they don't carry it. The ones I could see were not carrying it, didn't want to, and had another way of settling like problems. And so I think it was harder for them to get sometimes the respect or the authority. But still, I think, and Ipek, the situation that you mentioned is not, maybe she has become a very long Muhtar, she has stayed in office for a very long time, but I'm not surprised because actually also women Muhtars, first of all, it's important to keep in mind that it's the elected office that is the longest in Turkey, except now maybe presidential office is another issue. But let's say that Muhtars remain in office much longer than like municipal councillors or MPs, of course. There is this kind of longevity. And this is really interesting because you see how the authority that people, for example, first you are not elected as a nobody, of course. You need some like social resources to be known to be elected, even as a woman. Many women Muhtar who are elected are also part of some big families, or when I say big families, I mean important families in the neighborhood. But once you're elected, that helps actually consolidating that social authority. So then there is this inertia to some extent. And I wanted to come back to the question of İpek about why do people want to be elected and want to be muhtars. That's actually a big question, because I mean, that's not a job I would like to do. It's a hard job, really. It's not, I mean, not only do people work a lot, but they are never like, they can never rest, never. So it's really hard, and they deal with very complicated issues and all kinds of, so it's not an easy job. And but I was really surprised, because people, yes, they want, I mean, it's an office for which people really compete. They really want to be elected. That if you look at the instances of violence, electoral violence, I mean, the most instances of political violence, electoral violence, where people are killed or injured during elections, is for muhtars elections. It's incredible. I mean, you can take the statistics. I was so astonished. So it means that people really, you know, they invest something in that. They really want. And so why? I think, I'm not sure I have a really good answer to your question, but I think this is related to social esteem and consideration, much more than money. I mean, there is this whole story about, you know, like becoming rich as a muhtar. I don't think it's so easy to become rich. I mean, you can get some money, but there are easier ways. I mean, there are other ways. If your concern is becoming rich, it's not the easiest way to become a muhtar. So I don't think this is really that decisive. I would tend to think this is more of a social esteem. I have actually, of course, asked many muhtars about, but you know, they have this discourse, which is actually quite classical for elected people, like, I didn't want to be a muhtar, I'm not interested in power, I want to stay at home and do my family private life, etc. But people wanted me, you know, they really love me and they forced me. I'm just exaggerating a little bit, but that's basically the discourse that you get. And so I think there is and often, as you mentioned, Bilge, and also you, İpek, it's also about something that is transmitted in the family. So there is a question of social consideration. I would not say of honor, but I think of esteem, of being like a somebody, not only somebody important, but that has this, you know, trustworthy, and, you know, actually, I said they have no decisional power, but they have, you know, this very important influence in the local society that I think many people are interested in some ways. There are several questions.
Kim, do you want to go ahead? And then Seda, and then Dima. We have three.
Okay, thank you so much, Elise. It is a real pleasure to be able to listen to your presentation and be in conversation. Your work has been very inspirational to me. I work on state making, but from the angle of environment and infrastructure and in the countryside. So my questions would come from that perspective a little bit. I am curious about the muhtar's relationships with the bureaucrats, especially at the local level. And I'm curious about that both conceptually and empirically, actually. Conceptually, I was, as you presented, the main takeaways and your arguments, a lot of the arguments about, you know, street level governing, being the facilitator, as well as kind of creating an effect of negotiable state, all of these forms of governing sounds very relevant for thinking about bureaucratic governance from the local level, especially, as I said, I am most familiar with what happens in the countryside in rural Turkey. You know, the bureaucratic governance being something else than bureaucratic indifference, as Hirschfeld kind of conceptualizes it. More recent, as you very well know, anthropology of bureaucracy has been saying about bureaucracy being the mediator, and then between the state and the citizenship, and making a more negotiable and state appearance through mechanisms of facilitating. So I'm really curious how you differentiate conceptually Muhtar's street level governing versus, or maybe in parallel to, similar to, or different of local level bureaucrats, street level governing, if you will. So how to think about those forms of power?
Let me just say one thing. Can we take the questions after you now? Because we have 8 minutes remaining. We need to finish at 2. So that's why maybe
can I
collate the questions together. It will be
just one more sentence to add to my question, and I'm empirically curious to know if you had a chance to observe Muhtar's relationship with the bureaucrats as they visit their offices and channel the citizens' demands from them. What happens between bureaucrats and Muhtars? Thank you.
Do I answer now, or do we collect the questions? I was not clear. Yes, I answer now.
I thought Seda had a question.
Not really a question. I just want to say hi to Elise.
Dima, I think, as a question. So if we can get those 2, and then we'll leave the floor to you, and you can,
Okay, sure. Yeah, I just want to say something real quick, but yeah, you can get the question first if you like. Doesn't matter.
Sorry, yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for your talk. This is really very interesting. So I'm a sociologist of organizations, in fact, and I was wondering, so my question is pretty much related to Ekin's question. I was wondering why you chose to talk about the state and street level bureaucrats. I'm not familiar with the Turkish context, but I'm way more familiar with the Lebanese context, where there are Muhtar, in fact, as well. And I usually tend to think of Muhtars more as notables, like the notable, much more than a street level bureaucrat. So I was trying to think, why did you choose conceptually to position your very interesting empirical work on this discussion on the state, knowing that in this part of the word, I feel like the state doesn't have the same meaning anyway than in the Occidental literature, at least. And if it does, then the question of Ekin is relevant, because like I cannot escape thinking of Selznick's work on TV and the grassroots about how if the state wants to reach local beneficiaries, then it has to accept the local order and sort of accept that it has to pass through notables, local notables, so that it can be able to implement its policy. So just this question about why, like, why positioning theoretically the work in this way.
Thank you very much for this question and the hi of Seda. You know, we have not met like since 25 years, so nobody knows, but I'm very happy to see Seda too. So thank you very much. These are very core questions, so I will try to answer them in a satisfactory way in the last 5 minutes. So actually, I think because that's why I started from my starting point, which was a critique of the mainstream view of the Turkish state in political science. Because there is still, still this widespread consideration that the Turkish state is a strong state and is a very, like, as I said at the beginning. And this is actually not an empirical statements. This is a conceptualization that is still very influential, I would say, in political science. And I think that it brings many problems with it. Because whatever you work on, I mean, if you work with that conception of the state and even of the bureaucracy, it doesn't really match. So it was, my starting point was that. And at some point I should have probably, you know, like let it be or let it aside, because it remained as a very important starting point and reference to me. So I don't say, and so what I work with in the book is not bureaucracy as it works, is a conception, is a notion of bureaucracy and a representation of the state that is not real, that does not exist in reality. But that representation, it's not only that it is important in political science, it is also an image that is very influential in Turkish society, like the Turkish state, you know, and Muhtars actually also produce that image, you know, because in some interactions, you know, they present themselves as being that the useful for the people and able to help them, because the state is so, you know, strong and severe and strict, etc. So they fuel that representation, you know. And I mean, it's a little bit like the work of oh, I forgot his name right now, about the boundaries of the state, you know, like working both on the practices and on the representation that are very far from another. So I'm sorry if I gave the impression that I believe in that, you know, I don't, but I see how it has consequences. I try to look at that. So, and so empirically, yes, I did have the opportunity to observe a little bit, not all of the interactions of the Muhtars with the bureaucrats. I think that the bureaucracy is also to some extent working out like this on the local level, but I think this is at Muhtars, that Muhtars are more accessible to the very ordinary man of the street. I would tend to think that it is more accessible, and it is not accessible in the same ways. For example, if you like try to negotiate with bureaucracy, then normal people or would need to go through a party or through some acquaintance. It's different ways, even if it is similar to some extent. So, but I did not work on that. But I did, as I said, have the chance to look a little bit at the interactions between the bureaucrats and the Muhtars, and it was, I could not access everything, of course, also as a foreigner, you know, it's not obvious. But what I could see is that there were actually this kind of mutual bargaining in some ways. I mean, that from the beginning, I thought that Muhtars would need bureaucrats, because Muhtars, as I said, they have no resource. They channel, but they try to orientate, but they have no resource. They need to go orientate to the places where the resources are. So this is basically the state. So they need the bureaucrats. But I saw also that bureaucrats in some ways, other ways, would also need to rely on Muhtars on their information, because they consider that the Muhtar knows the places, knows the people, which is not always so much the case as they think. So I think this is a fascinating kind of interaction, and I would have loved to do more on that, and I would love to continue that conversation, Ekin, because it's a very we need more time, I mean. And Dima, thank you very much also. Well, I agree, and actually I work this street level bureaucrat, I took it as a reference, but only for the street level, you know, not for the bureaucrat. So actually I try to look at the street level non-bureaucrats. But of course in the title, and it's not obvious maybe, but so I work with that conception of notable, and I say that that actually the state produces notables and ways of notabilization, and And so I really use this concept. So I thank you very much. And I wanted to, I think, as you said, so that the framework of conception of states, the Western is not not necessarily relevant, and that's not the same meaning. I agree, but I think that again the Turkish state has this, you know, like image, which is important, much more than the Lebanese state, for example, which is considered like not inexistent, maybe inexistent, but very, you know, like they don't have the same image at all. I mean, at all. But still, I think this is, and I'm actually very interested in Lebanon, and I know that our mortars, they work I think a little bit differently, and I would be very interested to if there, you know, any works on that, because I have looked for works, I haven't seen anything, so I was frustrated, and I would love to know more. So I would also like to continue the conversation later if there is any opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Somebody wanted to, did I cut anybody off? I'm sorry. Okay, well, I wanted to thank you both again, Elise and Bilge, for this wonderful conversation. And I see that this was an occasion for Seda and Elise to see each other. They met as 17.
Such a long time, yes.
Wow.
It has been quite a time, yes, really.
This was a good occasion on that count as well. But congratulations, Elise, fantastic book. And so we're going to say goodbye now, and we'll be, as usual, we'll be in touch.
Yes, thank you so much really for the invitation and the conversation. It was really so stimulating. Thank you so much.